Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us this morning to guide us through the cyber insurance landscape and demystify cyber insurance for you all. We're joined by Kirsty Milne from Capsule, which is our trusted cyber insurance partner. Now, Kirsty leads Capsule's cyber partnerships, and has a strong background in software as a service, including her time at Gartner, where she worked with C-level leaders and tech scale-ups to support their growth. She now helps organizations understand digital risks and choose the right cover with confidence. And if you have any questions during the session, I'd ask if you could pop them in the Q&A box. I'll put a little message in there in a moment, and I'll put them to Kirsty at the end. Also, Josh from Capsule will be joining us later on at that time to help answer some technical questions as well. So, without further ado, demystifying cyber insurance with Kirsty Milne. Over to you, Kirsty.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that intro, Isaac, and very pleased to be here. Thank you all for joining us today for our session on demystifying cyber insurance. So, as Isaac said, my name is Kirsty. I look after the cyber partnerships here at Capsule. More on who Capsule is and what we do kind of as a business very shortly. But excitingly, we've recently partnered with ADM on delivering cyber insurances to businesses who are already investing in their cybersecurity posture. So looking forward to what is hopefully an engaging session today. In terms of an agenda, what does demystifying cyber insurance entail today? We'll start with introducing Capsule. As I said, give a bit of insight into who we are, what we do, how we've become ADM's trusted partner for cyber insurance. We will then move on to taking a look at why cyber insurance matters and, the real impact that it has on real businesses. The whole point of today is really to provide some clarity for you guys around what cyber insurance is, how it protects you and your business. What does it look like, beyond obvious financial impacts? So really uncovering some of those hidden or commonly forgotten costs and myths and unknowns really that surround cyber insurance. So we know that cyber policies can be quite complex for organizations to understand. So really breaking down what's typically included in policies and cyber insurance cover, and actually, quite importantly, what isn't included, and what instances would that be the case. We'll also dig into a little bit about, the technology environment that you have currently implemented. So the work that you're doing with ADM to build out, your cybersecurity strategy. This can influence both what your insurance costs and your ability to actually claim successfully in the case of a breach. So by the end of today's session, hopefully you've got some clear actions that you can take away and implement yourselves. You'll have a clearer picture on how cyber insurance really fits into your entire risk management strategy, and the steps that you can take to better protect your business. So good place to start, an introduction to Capsule. We are a forward-thinking UK insurance broker. So we work with businesses to support themselves with their insurance needs and also their cybersecurity partners. So ourselves, we're quite a young business, founded 4 or so years ago by Tom and Liam, who had previously to Capsule grew and exited a business themselves. So in that time, we've grown our client base. We've worked with leading technology and cyber clients. This has really positioned us as a specialist broker in, data risk, technology risk, cyber risk. And these expertise really mean that we're kind of uniquely placed to help maybe traditional businesses who could be using a broker that, I don't know, specializes in potentially supply chain risk, for example, and not necessarily cyber risk, which is one of the biggest threats that the organizations face today. So what also makes us different is that we deliver better insurance outcomes for our clients. How do we do this? We have a deeper look into the cybersecurity controls and risk mitigations that you've actually got in place as an organization. We really want to understand how you're protecting your business already, and reward you for proactively managing that and investing in your risk posture, because we recognize that having a better cybersecurity infrastructure ultimately makes you a better risk for insurers. So if and when a claim occurs, they're going to be less frequent, they're going to be smaller, your business is going to recover quicker. And really, this should be reflected in a really tailored cyber insurance policy in kind of the form of cyber insurance premium discounts. So that's a bit on who we are, what we do, and then kind of leaning more into the importance of cyber insurance. As I mentioned earlier, cyber risk is one of the biggest threats in this modern world that we're living in, that your business faces. So ensuring that your business is sufficiently protected is critical. Great sign that you're here today watching this webinar, as that is kind of a first step in it. But even in our personal lives over the last year or so, we've seen such high profile cyber attacks present across headlines. It's no longer really an abstract concept to us. Very notable cases like JLR, Marks and Spencer's, do very public examples that are huge brands that we know very well in our day-to-day life. And quite scarily, only 95% of breaches that ever occur will be made public. So the thought of, the majority of cyber attacks that happen fly under the radar, but we're increasingly seeing these breaches splashed across kind of everyday news. Excuse me. So if we look at JLR, for example, this is now known to be one of the costly cyber attacks in UK history because they didn't have cyber insurance in place at the time of the attack. So the event is now estimated to cost around £1.9 billion in its impact on the UK economy. We know that sensitive data was leaked by the Ransomware group. This included source code, internal documents, employee credentials, ultimately raising serious concerns about identity theft, phishing risk, and long-term reputational damage. This cyber attack actually caused JLR to halt the production at major UK plants for 5 weeks. So there was zero vehicle production during September, which led to a 27% drop in UK car production, which is the worst in over 70 years, which is crazy considering that we've lived through a pandemic in that time. It's really shocking that they didn't have cyber insurance in place. That's no surprise to anyone. They had nothing to absorb the financial and operational impacts. They've had to rely on the government to kind of bounce back from that. Kind of a real example of how these breaches touch every corner of a business: operations, supply chain, brands, investor confidence. We'll go into all of those kind of impacts, shortly, but this is a stark reality of why every business should have cyber insurance in place. I know that following these, there's been a lot of nervousness around it, but not having it in place and the cost of it is kind of existential. M&S, again, huge implications for M&S. Ransomware, I think, estimated to cost around 300 million. This wiped out 30% of M&S's annual operating profit. So massive financial hit stemmed from weeks of halted online orders. We all saw kind of the empty shelves in stores. Really interesting point with M&S as well, that while they were struggling to recover and bounce back from the impact, their rival retailer Next capitalized on the disruption that was actually made throughout this. So they've upgraded their profit forecast to 1.1 billion. So not only impacting M&S, but actually, giving a competitive advantage to a closer rival. So this incident is different to JLR. They have had cyber insurance in place. They are going to be able to claim back 100 million through their insurance coverage. So ultimately what this shows is cyber insurance is already playing a key role in getting M&S back up and running. It's maybe hasn't covered all of the losses, but it's provided critical financial backstop and helping stabilize their operations. So buying back time to recover, resume their growth. Ultimately here with these, yes, they're massive names that we know, but if these kind of instances had happened to SMEs who don't have the infrastructure in place that JLR and MS do, it would have been a completely different story. People can invest lots in cybersecurity and it's critical that they do, but that categorically does not mean that they're immune from a cyber attack. It's not going to happen. As I said, small businesses don't have the financial buffers that these guys do. Which is where the cyber insurance is key to kind of come in and support, but alongside your cybersecurity vendor. So if we look at building an end-to-end cybersecurity strategy and how cyber insurance plays a part in that, and the work that you're already doing with the likes of ADM, protect your business, both your insurer and your cybersecurity partner, ADM, in this instance, will play key roles in the bigger cyber picture. We'll both talk to you about risk, but it'll be from different angles ultimately. You work with ADM to really build the infrastructure. So if we look at that kind of red section there, that pre-breach aspect, to protect your business from cyber threats, things like firewalls, endpoint protection, backups, real-time threat monitoring, etc. It's all about that preventative piece and reducing, hopefully, the likelihood and the impact of a breach. But where cyber assurance comes in as a complement to that and another component of the end-to-end strategy. This is designed specifically for the digital risk, so it doesn't prevent it. It really helps businesses bounce back when those threats turn into real incidents. It talks more to the financial protections, the legal support, and the rapid response post-breach. We'll dive deeper into those different elements later today, but just to paint the picture of what it is for an end-to-end strategy, having two key components in place. So this is really looking at kind of layered protection, prevention plus recovery. So let's take a deeper look into how these work together and really bring it to life for you. And I thought a good way to do this was through almost a real life example of a breach and how having cyber insurance in place can be the difference between surviving or ultimately terminating a business. So it's imperative for you guys to know that if you have cyber insurance in place, what are you covered for? What do you need to have in place from a business perspective to be able to essentially make that cyber insurance effective and understand how exposed you really are? So we'll look at a hypothetical case of Brightside Marketing. They are a 25-person digital agency handling sensitive client data every day. So like many small and mid-sized businesses, they rely heavily on cloud services. They've got some security measures in place, such as MFA for email, but they have also got gaps. For example, endpoint monitoring. This is something they don't have in place, which leaves them highly exposed and at risk. So 2 years ago, Brightside did purchase a cyber insurance policy through their broker. However, they haven't reviewed it since they purchased it 2 years ago, and they simply just assume it covers everything that they need and they don't need to worry about it. It's there, it's a box ticked, it's in place. So with that in mind, we've got a combination here of technical vulnerabilities and policy blind spots. So unfortunately, this is something that we see quite regularly. You know, businesses either see insurance, as I said, just a box ticking exercise. Say, yeah, got that in place, therefore we're compliant, or they're unsure who it sits with in the business. Is that IT's problem? Is that something that should sit with finance? A question mark that kind of looms over that. So what happens when Brightside Marketing Agency face a cyber attack? What are the implications on their protection? How can their insurance support them in returning back to optimal functionality? Initially, let's look at the team at Brightside Marketing, who's involved. So got the CEO, Sarah. In a typical week, she's going to be focusing on entire business strategy, growth of the business. And of course, her focus is going to be business success. When the cyber attack occurs, her priorities flip overnight. It's now crisis calls, reputation management, business survival. You've got Tom, who is IT manager from outsourced MSP. They're supporting Brightside with cybersecurity controls. So in the instance of a cyber attack, he's going to be the first responder. Worth flagging though, you know, his role isn't just technical. He's managing compliance, vendor contracts, explaining security gaps to leadership and to the insurer. And we've got Priya, she's finance director. Normal priorities include ensuring companies focused on the most fruitful projects, so supporting Sarah in strategic decisions, but suddenly she's now calculating downtime costs, legal fees, negotiating with insurers, for example. This cyber risk really becomes a financial risk instantly. So we've got Jake, from a client perspective, he loves his role in positioning the team at Brightside to meet evolving customer and business needs. But following the cyber attack, he's instead firefighting clients' concerns, protecting the relationships that they've got, managing the reputational fallout. And every hour offline is, you know, angry calls from customers, lost customer trust, that reputation just being kind of damaged further and further. Then we move more externally. We've got Emma, the insurer. So she advises Brightside on insurance policies, including their cyber coverage. But as we know, she hasn't spoken with Brightside in 2 years since they initially purchased their policy. So following the cyber attack, which we'll see kind of plan out very shortly, she's now advising on policy coverage, exclusions. This is really where the assumptions of cyber insurance and coverage get tested, what's covered, what's not, why your security controls matter in this instant as well. And then obviously we've got Shadow. So he is the attacker, here to cause maximum disruption for maximum payout from his side behind the scenes. So doesn't care about the organizational chart, but his actions ultimately are going to be impacting every single name on this slide. Important to understand here that when we say cyber risk is a business risk, this is what we mean. It's not just an IT issue, it's a leadership issue, a financial issue, a client issue. So the decisions that you make before an attack determine how well you survive after one occurs. So something for you to think about when you walk away from our session today is who in your business owns and manages your cyber risk today? Is it, if the answer is just IT look after that, then that ultimately is a gap that we've identified already, within the first 15 minutes of our call today. So the breach itself, how did it all pan out? Hopefully this is something that no one on today's call has experienced, but I imagine this isn't going to be completely alien to you in terms of concept. So if we look 13 days out from when kind of the incident happens, all started with a simple phishing email where Brightside's employee received what looked like a legitimate proposal from a trusted client, made it look realistic, no concerns, social engineering was implemented. So assuming everything was okay, the employee clicked the email, and that single click opened the door for Shadow, the attacker, to enter the business ultimately. So having gained access through the phishing email, Shadow quietly harvested credentials, gained a foothold in all of Brightside's systems. At this stage, for Brightside, there were no alarms. Everything seemed normal from an internal perspective, and they continued their operations as normal. So 3 days out, exfiltration stage always gets me. The malware had spread, so attackers were exploring shared drives, they'd accessed their CRM, they'd downloaded sensitive client data, because Brightside unknowingly had no endpoint monitoring in place. So on Friday night, ransomware was deployed and extortion demanded. So files became inaccessible. They received a ransom note demanding 50k in Bitcoin. All of Brightside's operations ground to a halt on a Friday night, just in time for the weekend. So in the hours that followed, the team scrambled. They were unable to access any client campaigns. Tom and the IT team worked to isolate all of their systems. Sarah, the CEO, as I said, called into crisis calls. Clients were fuming, and Tom had alerted Emma, the insurer. So in the days that followed, Brightside were navigating the communications between all the parties involved here and handling the incident. So they've got their MSP, they've got their internal teams, they've got the insurer. There were experts who were now spending hours on forensics, legal notifications and started, and everything was a moving part. It was chaos, as you would imagine, when everything at a business has ground to a halt. So the impact didn't necessarily then end with the recovery and trying to maintain all of that. Following weeks and months were filled with regulatory requirements, lawsuits, potential client claims, zooming on them for months, adding real hidden costs and stress that they hadn't anticipated prior to the attack. So these are kind of the steps that happened. This is how it all unfollowed. But what we want to do is leverage this timeline, this story, on what those hidden costs were and how insurance plays a part in this. So when businesses think about a cyber attack, most people immediately picture, the upfront cost, the ransom demand. In this case, we know that was 50k, or the cost of the IT recovery. But the reality is the financial and operational ripple effects that follow go so much deeper than that face value. There's operational financial factors that can be crippling, especially for smaller businesses. So really want to give you visibility of what those hidden costs are today so that you're aware of them. You can go away and you can prepare. So we're looking at these in two areas. We've got operational category, operational category, sorry. So these costs are incurred for regular ongoing activities of a business that directly affect a company's operating income. So these are the components that are ultimately critical for generating revenue. So examples of these, you've got CEO and leadership time. We know Sarah's been pulled into all of these crisis meetings overnight. She spent 3 full days in emergency meetings instead of focusing her time on driving growth. So she's been taken away from her typical focus. Ultimately, a huge opportunity loss for the business. So here for Brightside, 3 to 5K in costs that they hadn't anticipated. We've got IT obviously fighting fires, but Jake and his team, who were client facing, pulled away from revenue generating work to handle angry calls, reassure customers. In this situation, we're looking at, an indicative cost of 8K, but bear in mind, this is going to vary from business to business, depending on the clients that you serve, the industry that you're in, what is your deal size, what could this red number actually look like for you? So this is in the context of a marketing agency and wouldn't necessarily be the same for you guys. On top of that, we've also got the project delays, staff productivity loss. So as we know, campaigns for major clients were paused. The entire team was locked out of systems for over 72 hours. So they weren't ultimately delivering against billable work. Even departments who weren't necessarily directly affected by the attack have been ground to a halt because of the impact of the cyber attack, business-wide problem. This can be a huge cost to business in terms of loss of income. So if we're looking at this for Brightside, we've got 10 to 15 for project delays, staff productivity loss up to 13K. So that's the operational costs. Then let's look at kind of the financial impact. So the expenses that are related to a company's financing activities, such as borrowing money. These are the ones that affect kind of net income. They're not tied necessarily to the core business operations. So for Brightside, we've got forensic experts and compliant lawyers. These guys don't come cheap. So emergency IT and legal costs following the breach for Brightside came to a total of 25K. We've then got lost revenue and reputational damage. Let's throw them into the mix. 2 major clients paused projects. This was 40K lost in immediate revenue. But the bigger hit, more long-term from the initial impact, is that long-term trust and erosion, potential client churn that you've lost as a result of lack of trust, for example. So if we look at that, more long-term and an additional 20 to 50K in this instance. And then finally, the insurance gap. So Brightside assumed their policy would cover everything. They haven't looked at it for 2 years. It didn't. Their lack of endpoint monitoring meant that they experienced a partial claim denial. So they had tens and thousands unrecovered from their cyber insurance policy. So these hidden costs can easily double or triple the headline ransom figure that you are faced with in the first instance. And this is why understanding your coverage, aligning it with the IT controls that you've got in place, is important for you and your business. So as I said, the key takeaway here is that if you don't understand what those hidden costs could be, you ultimately underestimate the risk that you're at. And if you don't know the policy exclusions that might exist with your policy, you're overestimating your protection. So you'll end up there in ultimately a false sense of security. So after today, a really useful exercise for you to go and do to ensure that this isn't you in this position is to go and have a look at your insurance policy if you've got one in place and review the wording that you've got, confirm your IT controls, speak to your insurer, ask them the tough questions. We would absolutely be more than happy to support you with any policy wording reviews should you wish to kind of reach out to us afterwards, just to double check kind of the position that you guys are in and get better visibility of that. So this is just a fraction of kind of the common misconceptions or myths or hidden costs that you would see around cyber insurance. There are various other myths that you hear. It might be the case for you guys that you see a couple of these say and you think, oh, that's actually us. The first one being, I've got generic business insurance in place, so we're covered for cyber attacks. Why would I need to get a standalone cyber insurance policy? This is a question that we've been asked so many times. And And the reality is that most standard business insurance policies don't necessarily cover cyber incidents. They're designed more for, physical risks that are posed to a business, like property damage, liability, not the digital threats. So a data breach, ransomware attack, GDPR fine typically falls outside of those business policies, typical business policies that you might have. Cyber insurance is specifically built for the costs and the complexities of cyber incidents, things like the forensic investigations, the data restoration, the legal defense, the regulatory fines that follow. Generic business insurance just doesn't really touch those areas. So very important to flag and kind of make that differentiation. The next is cyber insurance will cover everything. If I get hacked, we're absolutely fine. It's in place. As we've just seen with Brightside, who had a cyber insurance policy in place, it covered specific costs, and there are certain policy security conditions that are required from insurers. A good example of that is MFA. It's a basic security measure that most insurers will expect you to have in place for, your insurance policy to protect you in the case of a breach. We've also had, I've got a third-party cybersecurity partner that'll keep us safe. I don't need insurance. So that kind of takes us back to the table that we saw at the beginning of how they work in tandem together. Unfortunately, even with strong cybersecurity protection in place, we know that breaches can still happen. Think human error, supply chain attacks. You've got zero-day vulnerabilities, for example. Cyber insurance doesn't prevent the incidents, as we discussed earlier on. It helps manage the financial, operational, legal fallout when they occur, which is the exact reason that we've partnered with ADM. Putting cyber insurance and cybersecurity as part of the same conversation. They're not competitors, they're partners. And when you combine both, you're creating a layered defense for your business, better protecting yourself. Ultimately, the stronger your protection, the better that's going to be reflected in your cyber insurance policies. It's a win-win, better protection, better pricing, and kind of better risk there for you guys. So let's have a look at what cyber insurance actually covers when it is in place. So similarly to the hidden costs, there are kind of two main buckets of coverage in this instance. So we've got first-party coverage and third-party coverage. So important to flag here before we kind of go through these, that this does vary between insurer and between policy. So again, don't be Brightside and kind of not talk to your broker or your insurer for 2 years, but just flagging, what's important for you guys to be aware of. But on the left-hand side, we've got the first-party coverage. So this applies to your own losses. So the incident response, data restoration, and business interruption. So for example, in the context of Brightside, when they called their insurer, the incident response retainer kicked in, and they had a breach coach, a forensic firm, and a legal counsel were deployed to handle the attack. They had coverage for ransom negotiation and payment, but because they didn't have their endpoint monitoring in place, this then was an exclusion and it wasn't necessarily covered. They also had business interruption covered up for 14 days, but only for lost net income and continuing expenses. So first party is really there to help you stabilize and recover. But in these instances, evidence of impact and necessity are crucial. Then we go over to the right-hand side, we've got a third-party coverage, which protects you against your external claims. For example, your client data has been breached, and they are deciding to sue you because of the exposure that this has imposed on them. So these include, client data breach claims, regulatory fines and penalties, so things like GDPR fines, legal defense costs for investigations and lawsuits, and then PR crisis and management as well, which is worth mentioning. Most policies kind of include those. So hopefully this gives you some clarity into how cyber insurance complements the work that you're already doing. This is kind of where it provides a financial safety net for you, but absolutely not a substitute for strong security. As we know, and with Brightside, there were gaps. We can run into them when it comes to risks and when it does come to these claims. So what are these gaps that you should be aware of that could potentially leave you exposed? Core cyber controls, key one, we highlighted kind of MFA is a basic control that most insurers would expect. A lot of businesses have MFA, but not everywhere. So maybe you've got it on your emails, but not on your remote access or your admin accounts. That's a gap that attackers love and insurers most certainly will notice. We've also got policy reviews. Key takeaway from today, this isn't a set and forget. If your policy hasn't been reviewed in a year or two, you might assume you're covered for things that have since changed as a business, or changed within your business, sorry. So that could be a very nasty surprise when you go to make a claim. And in Capsule, we think that's a very old-fashioned way for insurers to serve their clients. Businesses are constantly changing. Their risk profiles are also changing when that happens. So you should be touching base with your insurer and broker regularly to ensure that it's not a surprise that you ever face, and it is reflective of kind of the situation that your business is in. Then there's the unmonitored endpoints, again, one we've mentioned frequently today. So the lack of it being the entire reason kind of bright sides attack happened. Laptops, mobiles, IoT devices, if they're not monitored, they are ultimately an open door for a hacker. If an attack starts there, it can invalidate your coverage because you were not covered for the monitoring. Another one is the ransom coverage assumption. So many businesses just think if we get hit with ransomware, insurance are going to pay out in that instance. That is not always the case. It depends on your policy. It depends on whether your security conditions were met. Again, like we saw with Brightside, it wasn't reflective of what they should have had. We've then got the incident response plan, or lack of them. This is another gap. So if you don't have a documented, a tested plan, your recovery is going to take longer. The incident's going to cost more, and insurers may penalise you on that. We've got vendor dependencies. This is very often overlooked. If a supplier that you're currently using gets breached and you suffer a loss, your policy might not cover it unless that's spelled out in the first place. So something definitely to check. And finally, the exclusion blind spots. So every policy is going to have exclusions, certain attack types, regions, circumstances, for example. If you don't know what they are, and it becomes an afterthought for you, you could be blindsided in that aspect. So hopefully a useful resource, again, for you to just take away. These gaps don't necessarily just increase the risk that you're at. They can affect whether your insurance pays out. So ultimately, hopefully an easy action again for you to just go and cross-reference and double check. Moving then on to how your IT setup can affect your premiums and your claims. So this is where your IT setup really matters, not just from a security perspective, but for your insurance costs and whether your claims get paid out. So I've said it before, the key message here is simple in that your strong IT cyber controls should mean for you that you are paying lower premiums, you're going to have fewer claims and less severe incidents. So let's break it down into what kind of those key factors can be. Starting with backup and recovery protocols. So if you've got verified backups and tested recovery process, insurers will see you as a lower risk. That should mean for you better pricing and faster recovery if something were to go wrong. Endpoint detection and response. Insurers often require active monitoring to be implemented because without it, ultimately your risk rating shoots up. It's one of the first things they'll most likely look for. Instant response planning, I have mentioned as well. If you can go to your insurer, show them a documented, tested playbook, they're immediately going to know that you are prepared. So that can reduce both risk and cost for you guys. On the access side, MFA, as I said, critical. Missing MFA can lead to a claim denial or actually higher premiums. Patch management, another one. Outdated software, missed updates that can invalidate your coverage. A simple control that can have a huge impact ultimately. And then finally, we've got the vendor security alignment. So if your third-party vendors don't meet your policy conditions, the gaps can then void claims. Again, another instant you just don't want to be in that position. So insurers will want to see you managing that risk as well. So looking at these straight away, you might be thinking, I think that's a gap that we've got. So go and speak with ADM or your cybersecurity partner to patch these up and ensure these are things that you have got in place. click's not working. Sorry, there we go. So bearing all of that in mind, hopefully that's been useful for you. We know that cyber insurance is complicated. It can be highly specific. I really hope, using Brightside's example, understanding how an incident touches, technology, as I said, operations, legal, finance, but then also how the right posture that you are in control of can shorten your claims. It can reduce your costs as a business. Overall, really, Capsule are partnering with insurers and security vendors to help manage or help map, the coverage that you've got in place to real control. So if you scan this QR code, it will take you to our cyber insurance portal where you can get a direct quote from us. As I said, alternatively, reach out. We can have a look at your policy, review your wording, check for any existing gaps that you might have, highlight, some that we've walked through today, and really give you an external review. More than happy to support in that, but ultimately just want you to be able to walk away from today with somewhat of a checklist that you can actually implement in the infrastructure that you've got in place, work with ADM to make sure that you aren't going to be bright side and hopefully better protected. So lots of time here for questions. I appreciate with cyber insurance and its complications, there most likely will be. As Isaac mentioned, I have brought my colleague Josh along with me today, who is very helpful with all the technical questions. So yeah, open the floor to that.
Thanks very much, Kirsty. Yeah, we've got Josh in. I'm just going to unmute his microphone and camera. Perfect. Okay. Yeah, so we've got Josh here today as well from Capsule to answer any questions you might have. There's no questions as of yet. Of course, Matt Phil chimed in asking if we're testing them with the QR code there. But no questions as of yet, which means you've been doing your job pretty well there. I was wondering if it might be worth going through a couple of FAQs between you both, while we wait for some questions to come through, or if we get none, then it might just be useful. Some things people might not have thought of. If you do have any questions, obviously, post-event, do get in touch with us or Capsule. You can get in touch with ADM by emailing me, which is Isaac, ISAAC, at adm-computing.co.uk. That's Isaac, ISAAC, at adm-computing.co.uk. I've just seen there is one question from Andrew, actually. Is Sophos MDR and Cyber Essentials Plus mandatory for cyber insurance? And that's probably a no from our end, but certainly beneficial and important factors that help reduce the premiums, I expect. But I'll pass over to the experts.
Yeah, exactly that. Not mandatory for insurance. Sophos MDR or any MDR solution would reduce the premium of the cyber insurance policy. And then Cyber Essentials, some insurers ask it specifically. Is there Cyber Essentials? Majority of insurers don't ask that question. But where they do, they provide discount. So it just pushes the premium down.
Brill. Thank you very much. I can see Andrew's also said he'd like to book in a session with your team, but you'll be able to see that there as well. You mentioned active monitoring, and MDR does this, but it's 15 a user a month. Yes, Andrew, you're absolutely right. The active monitoring is another service, but I think that's probably more of a question for our team because MDR has a lot more to it. So yeah, that's all I can really give you on that one at the moment. Is the discount for? Oh, this is a good question actually. Is the discount for having Cyber Insurance Plus compared to Basic, Cyber Essentials Plus compared to Basic, a dramatic reduction in premium from your experience?
It's more to do with the controls that are in place. So the actual act of having Cyber Essentials or Cyber Essentials Plus, those certifications themselves usually don't discount. It's controls that get put in place in order to gain those certifications. Majority of the time, there is a significant change in premium, but it also depends on what your premium is to begin with. So if you're paying £2,000 and a discount would go from say 15 to 20%, then yeah, you're not going to see too much. But if you're paying £100,000 for your cyber insurance policy, then yeah, you'll see a decent saving on that.
Real, and he's given the price plus there at the moment. Yeah, so okay, that's great. It's, as I was saying, if you what we'll do is we'll set Andrew up with you guys following this session. It might be useful for all parties. And again, if there's any questions, do put them in the Q&A box while we're just going through the FAQs. If there is any, Josh or Kirsty, that you hear a lot, that might be beneficial.
Yeah, usually if for businesses who don't have cyber insurance, it's usually how cheap is cyber insurance, or the like bare minimum kind of low limit cover, probably about £100 is the kind of cheapest quote you're going to get. It's all relative to obviously a business size, how much data you hold, what risk controls you have in place, claims history, that sort of stuff. So, it will vary from business to business. But yeah, it isn't. I think the previous stats that we were looking at is about 1 to 3% of your turnover. If you wanted a general rule of thumb, it might vary for your individual business, but yeah, usually between 1 to 3% of your annual turnover is generally what cyber insurance costs. Depending on who your broker is, how well they negotiate with the insurer, how well they kind of position your controls, because a lot of the time insurers will ask for on the form for what controls you have in place, but that's just to meet their kind of minimum requirements. Kind of need to be telling them if you're sitting above, which your broker should be helping you to kind of pull out and present to your insurer to drive that premium down.
Sure. Okay, that's great. Real. Anything else that commonly pops up?
Probably I suppose there's a misunderstanding about with insurance. You just think of it as when something happens, the insurance picks it up, which obviously insurance does and it should, but cyber insurance is more about the kind of operational aspect of it. Because it steps in so urgently. So usually if you have a property damage claim, you've broken laptop, you submit it, and like it might go a few days, a week, and then they give you the money and you go buy a new laptop and that stuff. It's maybe not the most time precious element of cover. Whereas with cyber, if something happens right here now today, you want someone to step in straight away, deploy all of their vendors that they can, deploy legal counsel to kind of establish that client attorney privilege, get PR involved when as and when it's needed. So kind of choosing the insurance provider isn't just it shouldn't just be about pay or who quotes the cheapest. You should really kind of look into what services they provide in addition, like what is their response time to claims, what is their acceptance rate to claims, and really kind of get into the nitty gritty. They have a UK based team. If you've got subsidiaries worldwide, does the insurer have teams that can access those subsidiaries? And if they need to kind of have boots on the ground, just really get into the details. But like I said, if you've got a broker involved, there should be some element of them explaining that to you and kind of having that oversight for you to help you get a good understanding of where you are covered and where you're not.
That's great. Thanks very much, Josh. I've just seen another one come through on my notifications about a recording becoming available. There will be a recording of this session available. We may minus the questions off it just to protect sort of attendees' names and things, but there will be a recording of the session available following this webinar, and it will be posted on our ADM YouTube channel, which I will share with you. Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to suggest, obviously there's a fair bit of time back, but I'm going to suggest giving that time back to you all as attendees. And if you do have any further questions, do drop us a message. Let me put my email into the chat as well. There we go. And the number. So do email us or call us if you have any further questions, or get in touch with Capsule, of course. But if you come through us, I believe there's possibly some chance of preferential discounts and things, Kirsty.
Yeah.
Okay, so so do let us know if you have any further questions, and we can relay those to the experts. And that's all for today, I'm going to say, unless Kirsty or Josh, you have anything else to add?
No, all good. Yes, welcome any questions to us or any policy reviews. Absolutely more than happy to help. But thank you very much for having us, Isaac.
Real. Thank you both. Really appreciate it, and thanks all for attending. Thank you very much.
Thank
See you
you.
at the next
Bye-bye.
one.
Have a good day, all. Bye.